Zextai had fought in over 300 battles across 47 worlds, but nothing had prepared him for this place. The humans called it Earth, though every civilized species in the galaxy knew it by its proper designation, Deathworld Classification 7. The highest possible rating for planetary hostility. The arena stretched before him like a metallic coliseum, its walls gleaming under artificial suns that burned too bright, too hot. Spectators from dozens of species filled the towering stands, their various forms of excitement creating a cacophony that made his sensitive hearing plates ache. But it was the gravity that truly bothered him. Everything here pulled at his bones with relentless force, making even simple movements feel like carrying stones. As a Kytherian warrior, Zextai stood nearly 8 feet tall when fully extended, his 4 arms ending in razor-sharp talons that could slice through most known metals. His carapace, evolved over millions of years on a world where only the strongest survived, could deflect plasma rounds. His people had conquered 17 star systems through pure combat superiority. They were apex predators, born for war. Yet here he was, struggling against the oppressive weight of this cursed world, waiting to face a creature that somehow thrived in conditions that would crush most galactic citizens within minutes. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena in a dozen languages simultaneously. Today we witness another chapter in the Galactic Combat Championship. In the red corner, weighing 430 pounds, with a record of 300 wins and 0 losses, the Dread Claw of Kythera Zextai. The crowd's roar was deafening. Zextai raised all 4 arms in acknowledgement, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered a battle greeting. Pride swelled in his chest cavity. 300 victories. Not one defeat. He was death incarnate, the finest warrior his people had ever produced. And, in the blue corner, the announcer continued, weighing 185 pounds, with a record of 15 wins and 2 losses, representing the Deathworld Earth, James Sullivan. Zextai's confidence faltered as his opponent entered the arena. The human was small. Impossibly, ridiculously small. Where Zextai's body was built like a walking fortress of chitin and muscle, this James Sullivan looked like he might snap if the wind blew too hard. 2 arms instead of 4. No natural armor. No claws or fangs. Just pale skin that looked thin enough to tear with a gentle touch. The human moved with an odd grace despite the crushing gravity, but, to Zextai's experienced eye, he looked weak. How had such a fragile creature survived even one battle, let alone 115? It made no sense. As they approached the center of the arena for the traditional pre-combat ritual, Zextai got his first close look at his opponent. The human's eyes were a strange blue color, almost like the ice crystals on Zextai's homeworld's polar regions. But there was something unsettling about them. They held no fear, no hesitation. They looked at Zextai with what could only be described as curiosity. Honored warrior, Zextai began, speaking in galactic standard as custom demanded, I offer you the traditional choice. Surrender now with honor, or face defeat in combat. There is no shame in acknowledging superior strength. The human tilted his head slightly, a gesture Zextai didn't recognize. Then, James Sullivan smiled, revealing small, blunt teeth that seemed utterly useless for combat. Thanks for the offer, the human said in surprisingly fluent galactic standard, though his accent was strange. But I didn't come here to surrender. May the best warrior win. Zextai felt a mixture of respect and pity. The human had courage, at least. It would make his death quick and honorable rather than the terrified scrambling Zextai had witnessed from some opponents. The referee, a crystalline being from the neutral zone, stepped between them. Combat will begin in 30 seconds. Remember, this is a fight to yield or unconsciousness. Death is prohibited under galactic combat regulations. Weapons check. Both fighters confirmed they carried no artificial weapons. In the arena, only natural abilities were permitted. Zextai flexed his talons, each one sharp enough to carve stone. The human simply stood there, hands at his sides, looking almost relaxed. 20 seconds, the referee announced. Zextai began his pre-combat breathing ritual, filling his battle lungs with the thick air of this world. His hearts, all 3 of them, began pumping faster, flooding his system with combat stimulants his body naturally produced. His vision sharpened until he could see individual drops of moisture on the arena floor. 10 seconds. The crowd fell silent. In that moment, Zextai felt the familiar calm that preceded battle. He had done this hundreds of times. The approach would be simple. Close the distance quickly, use his superior reach and four-armed advantage to grapple, then end it with controlled force to the human's fragile neck. Clean, efficient, honorable. Begin. Zextai launched forward with the speed that had made him legendary. His powerful legs, designed for hunting on a world where prey could leap 50 feet vertically, propelled him across the distance between them in less than 2 seconds. His upper arms reached out to grab, while his lower arms prepared to strike. But the human wasn't there. Confusion flooded Zextai's mind as his talons closed on empty air. He spun, searching for his opponent, and found James Sullivan standing calmly about 10 feet to his left. The human hadn't fled or scrambled desperately away. He had simply moved. Somehow, despite weighing less than half what Zextai did, and having only 2 legs, he had covered that distance in the same time it took Zextai to cross the space where he'd been standing. Interesting technique, the human said conversationally. Very direct. I like that. Zextai reset his stance, analyzing what had just happened. Perhaps he had underestimated the human's speed. No matter. Speed was useless without strength, and no creature so small could possibly match Kytherian power. He attacked again, this time more carefully, using his 4 arms to create a web of strikes that should be impossible to avoid. His talons moved in perfect coordination, a dance of death that had claimed hundreds of opponents. The human flowed between the strikes like water. Not fast enough to blur, not using any technique Zextai recognized, but somehow never quite where the attacks were aimed. It was like trying to grab smoke. Every talon that should have connected swept through empty space, while the human remained untouched. Then, something struck Zextai's left knee. The blow came from below, a sharp impact that sent pain shooting up his leg. He stumbled, more from surprise than damage, and spun to face his opponent again. The human was standing exactly where he should have been to deliver such a strike, but Zextai hadn't even seen him move. How did you dash? Zextai began. The human struck again, this time at Zextai's lower right elbow. The impact was precise, hitting exactly the joint where his carapace was thinnest. Again, no real damage, but the message was clear. The human could have done serious harm if he'd chosen to. For the first time in 300 battles, Zextai felt something he'd almost forgotten, uncertainty. He backed away, reassessing his opponent with new eyes. The human followed slowly, not pressing his advantage, simply maintaining distance. There was something predatory in the way he moved now, a fluid readiness that reminded Zextai uncomfortably of the great hunters on his homeworld. You're not what I expected, Zextai admitted, circling warily. Neither are you, the human replied. I was told Kytherians were mindless berserkers who relied on brute force. You're actually quite skilled. The compliment caught Zextai off guard. Opponents rarely spoke during combat, and never with such casual respect. You honor me, human, but skill will not save you when I adapt to your tactics. Probably not, James agreed cheerfully. So I guess I'd better not let that happen. The human moved first this time, covering the ground between them with startling speed. But instead of the evasive tactics he'd used before, he came straight at Zextai. For a moment, the Kytherian warrior felt relief. Finally, a direct confrontation where his advantages would matter. The human ducked under Zextai's first strike and drove his fist into the warrior's stomach with tremendous force. The blow landed just below Zextai's primary armor plates, in the soft tissue that even Kytherian evolution hadn't been able to fully protect. Pain exploded through his torso as the impact drove the air from his lungs. But that was impossible. No creature so small should possess such strength. The force behind that punch felt like being kicked by a draft beast. Zextai staggered backward, gasping. The human pressed forward, landing 2 more strikes to the same area before dancing away from Zextai's retaliatory swipes. Each blow hit with the precision of a surgeon and the power of a siege engine. What are you? Zextai wheezed, struggling to refill his lungs. Just a guy who grew up in heavy gravity, the human answered. You know what they say about Deathworlders? We're built different. For the first time, Zextai truly understood what he was facing. This wasn't just another alien warrior. This was a creature evolved in conditions that would kill most galactic citizens. Every movement the human made was powered by muscles that had developed under crushing gravitational force. Every bone in his body was dense enough to support weight that would snap normal skeletons. This small, seemingly fragile being was actually incredibly, terrifyingly strong. But Zextai was a champion for good reason. Adapting to new threats was what separated great warriors from dead ones. If the human was stronger than expected, then this became a battle of technique and endurance rather than raw power. He shifted his stance, moving to a more defensive posture his instructors had drilled into him during his early training. For arms meant he could block and strike simultaneously. Longer reach meant he could keep the human at distance. Superior size meant he could outlast the smaller opponent's energy reserves. The next exchange proved his theory correct. When James closed distance again, Zextai was ready. He managed to intercept the human's strikes with his lower arms while attacking with his upper ones. For the first time in the fight, his talons found their target, raking across the human's left shoulder. But the wounds were shallow. The human's skin parted like paper, but somehow the damage was minimal. James grimaced but showed no sign of slowing down. Good adaptation, the human said, pressing a hand briefly to his wounded shoulder. Most fighters take longer to adjust. They circled each other again, both now showing more respect for their opponent's capabilities. Zextai's breathing had returned to normal, and he felt his confidence building again. He had drawn first blood. The human was fast and strong, but he was still made of soft flesh that could be cut. "Tell me, James Sullivan," Zextai said as they maneuvered for position, "why do you fight? Is it for glory? Wealth? The honor of your species?" The question seemed to surprise the human. "Honestly, I needed the money. My daughter's medical treatments are expensive, and combat prize money pays better than my regular job." Zextai's forward momentum faltered. "You fight for offspring? My little girl has a rare condition. The treatments aren't available on Earth yet, so we have to travel to Centauri Station every few months. It's costly." Something cold settled in Zextai's chest. In Kytherian culture, protecting one's offspring was the highest possible honor. To fight, to risk one's life for the sake of young ones, was considered the most noble of all motivations. "How many offspring do you have?" Zextai asked. "Just Sarah. She's 7 years old." The human's voice carried a warmth that made Zextai's throat tighten. "Smartest kid you've ever met. She wants to be a xenobiologist when she grows up, study alien life forms. I told her maybe she could start with me. I'm pretty alien by human standards." The joke fell flat in the arena's suddenly oppressive atmosphere. Zextai found himself looking at his opponent with entirely new eyes. This wasn't some glory-seeking warrior or bloodthirsty champion. This was a father fighting to save his child. "She sounds remarkable," Zextai said quietly. "She is. She made me promise to win today so we can afford the next treatment cycle. I don't intend to break that promise." The weight of those words settled on both fighters. Around them, the crowd grew restless, sensing the shift in the battle's momentum. Combat was supposed to be swift and decisive, not a philosophical discussion. They resumed fighting, but something had changed. Zextai found himself pulling his strikes, aiming for non-vital areas. When he had opportunities to end the fight decisively, he hesitated. The human seemed to sense this change and began taking more risks, landing more punishing blows. After several more exchanges, both fighters were showing wear. Zextai had multiple shallow cuts where the human's surprisingly hard fists had split his carapace. James had deeper gashes from talon strikes, though he moved as if the wounds didn't affect him at all. But it was Zextai who was tiring faster. The human's endurance seemed bottomless, while Zextai's 3 hearts were working overtime in the oppressive gravity. His movements were becoming slightly sluggish, his reactions a fraction slower. The end came suddenly. During what should have been a routine grappling exchange, the human caught one of Zextai's arms and used the Kytherian's own momentum against him. Zextai found himself flying through the air, his massive bulk turned into a weapon against himself. He hit the arena floor hard enough to crack the reinforced surface. Pain shot through his entire body, but worse than the physical damage was the realization that he was in a position he'd never experienced before. losing. The human stood over him, breathing hard, but still ready to continue fighting. This was the moment Zextai had delivered to hundreds of opponents, the decisive advantage that would lead to victory. Yield, James said quietly. You fought with honor, but this is over. Zextai stared up at his conqueror, processing the defeat. In 300 battles, he had never been outmatched so completely. The human wasn't just stronger and faster than expected. He was a superior warrior in every meaningful way. But as Zextai prepared to speak the words of surrender, something unprecedented happened. The human stepped back, lowering his hands. Actually, no, James said. Get up. Confusion flooded through every part of Zextai's being. What? I said get up. The fight isn't over. But you have victory position. You could end this now. The human shook his head. Not like this. Your fighting hurt, and you've been holding back since I mentioned my daughter. That's not a real victory. Zextai slowly rose to his feet, his mind struggling to process what was happening. I do not understand. Why would you refuse victory? Because winning matters, but how you win matters more. James resumed his fighting stance. Come at me with everything you have. Fight like the champion you are, not like someone who's worried about hurting me. For a long moment, Zextai simply stared. In his entire life, across hundreds of battles and thousands of training sessions, no opponent had ever shown such, what was the word? Honor didn't fit. Mercy was too simple. This was something else entirely. You would risk losing for the sake of a fair fight. I would risk everything for the sake of doing things right, the human replied. My daughter is watching this broadcast. What kind of father would I be if I taught her that victory without honor was acceptable? The crowd was becoming restless, unable to understand why the fight had paused. Voices called out in dozens of languages, demanding action. But Zextai heard none of it. His entire worldview was shifting, realigning around this impossible moment. He had been defeated by a superior warrior. That was acceptable, even honorable. But to have that same warrior refuse easy victory for the sake of principle, that was something beyond his experience. James Sullivan, Zextai said formally, raising all four arms in the highest gesture of respect his people possessed. You honor me beyond words. I will fight you as you deserve to be fought. The human smiled, that strange expression that showed his blunt teeth. That's all I wanted to hear. What followed was not just a fight, but an exhibition of martial artistry that would be remembered for generations. Freed from his concerns about causing serious harm, Zextai unleashed the full fury of Kytherian combat techniques. Every strike was precise, every movement economical, every tactic honed by centuries of warrior tradition. The human met him blow for blow, revealing levels of skill and power that defied everything Zextai thought he knew about aliens. James fought like he had been born for war, every movement flowing into the next, every counterattack perfectly timed. His small size became an advantage as he slipped between Zextai's attacks to land devastating blows. For nearly 20 minutes, they fought at the very edge of their abilities. The crowd fell silent, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just combat, it was art. But even the greatest warrior has limits. Zextai's endurance, already taxed by the planet's crushing gravity, finally began to fail. His movements slowed by fractions of seconds that the human exploited ruthlessly. One by one, his advantages disappeared until he found himself once again on the ground, this time truly defeated. James stood over him again, sweat streaming down his face, small cuts leaking red blood onto the arena floor. But his eyes held no triumph, only respect. Do you yield? He asked formally. Zextai looked up at this impossible creature who had shown him what true honor looked like. I yield to the superior warrior. You have won fairly and completely. The arena erupted as the referee declared James Sullivan the victor. But the human didn't acknowledge the cheers. Instead, he extended his hand to help Zextai to his feet. Thank you, James said as he pulled the massive alien upright. You gave me the fight I needed. As they stood together in the center of the arena, Zextai realized that something fundamental had changed inside him. He had lost his perfect record, his reputation as an undefeatable champion. But he had gained something more valuable, an understanding of what it truly meant to be a warrior. The human had defeated him not just with superior skill, but with superior character. And in refusing easy victory, James Sullivan had taught Zextai a lesson that would reshape everything he thought he knew about strength, honor, and what it meant to fight for something greater than personal glory. As they walked off the arena floor together, Zextai found himself hoping that somewhere in the galaxy, a 7-year-old girl named Sarah was proud of her father. She should be. He was a warrior worthy of legend, even if he was too humble to realize it. The crowd continued to roar around them, but Zextai barely heard it. His mind was already working through the implications of what he had witnessed. If one human could possess such extraordinary qualities, what did that say about their species as a whole? For the first time in his life, Zextai found himself genuinely curious about another race. These humans, these Deathworlders, might be far more interesting than anyone in the galaxy realized. And if today's battle was any indication, they might also be far more dangerous than anyone imagined. But that was a concern for another day. Right now, all that mattered was that he had been defeated by a better warrior, and, somehow, that felt like a victory in itself. 6 months had passed since Zextai's defeat in the arena, and the universe felt different. Not the physical universe. Stars still burned, planets still spun, and gravity still pulled with the same merciless force on this cursed death world. But something in his understanding of reality had shifted, like looking at a familiar constellation only to discover new stars hiding in plain sight. He stood now in the medical wing of Centauri Station, watching through reinforced transparisteel as doctors worked on a small human child. Sarah Sullivan lay unconscious on the treatment table, surrounded by alien medical technology that hummed and pulsed with purpose. Her father sat beside the bed, holding her tiny hand in both of his. Zextai had not expected to be here. After his public defeat, he should have returned to Kythera in shame, perhaps to seek honorable death in ritual combat rather than live with the stain of failure. Instead, he found himself drawn to learn more about the being who had bested him so completely. The investigation had begun as simple curiosity. Who was James Sullivan? What kind of warrior background had produced such skill? But the answers he discovered painted a picture that challenged everything Zextai thought he understood about strength and warfare. James Sullivan was not a professional fighter. He worked as what humans called a construction foreman, building habitable structures in hostile environments across the galaxy. His combat training came from mandatory service in something called the Earth Defense Force, but that had ended years before Sarah was born. Everything else, his speed, his technique, his devastating precision, was self-taught. More shocking still was the revelation that James was considered average by human standards. Not particularly large, not especially strong, not trained in any exotic martial arts. Just a regular citizen of a death world who had learned to fight because circumstances demanded it. If James Sullivan was average, what did that say about exceptional humans? The thought had haunted Zextai for months, driving him to research humanity with the same intensity he once devoted to perfecting combat techniques. What he discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans were predators, not omnivores who occasionally hunted for protein, like many species, but pure persistence predators evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their homeworld was indeed classified as a Class 7 death world, but even that rating seemed conservative once you understood the details. Earth experienced regular catastrophes that would devastate most civilized worlds. Storms with winds that could level cities. Earthquakes that reshaped continents. Temperature variations that swung from freezing to boiling. And yet humans thrived in all of these conditions, spreading across every environment their planet offered. But it was their behavior that truly set them apart. Other species developed technology to overcome environmental challenges. Humans seemed to prefer adaptation through sheer stubbornness. When faced with a problem, their first instinct was not to build a tool but to simply endure until they found a way to triumph through will alone. This explained much about James Sullivan's fighting style. He had not been trying to end the fight quickly or efficiently. He had been testing Zextai's limits, probing for weaknesses while demonstrating that he could continue indefinitely. It was persistence predator behavior applied to combat. "You've been standing there for 20 minutes, a voice said behind him. Zextai turned to see Dr. Yeshera, the Centaurian physician who had agreed to speak with him. Most visitors find the medical wing too sterile for extended observation. I am attempting to understand, Zextai replied carefully. Your patient's father defeated me in honorable combat. I wish to comprehend how this was possible. Dr. Yeshera's crest feathers fluffed slightly, the Centaurian equivalent of a shrug. Have you considered asking him directly? Humans are remarkably straightforward about such things. I have not earned the right to such questions. Our relationship is that of defeated warrior to victor. It would be presumptuous. Interesting perspective. James asked about you several times during previous visits. I think he would welcome the conversation. This was unexpected news. He spoke of me? Frequently. He seemed quite impressed with your combat abilities. Said you were the most skilled opponent he had ever faced. Dr. Yeshera paused, studying Zextai with large, intelligent eyes. He also mentioned that you held back during portions of the fight. He found that puzzling. Shame heated Zextai's primary circulation system. I allowed emotion to compromise my performance. It was unworthy behavior. Was it? Or was it the same instinct that caused him to refuse easy victory when he had you defeated? The question hit like a physical blow. Zextai had replayed that moment thousands of times, trying to understand why James had stepped back instead of claiming certain victory. The only explanation that made sense was that humans possessed some form of honor code that prioritized fair combat over efficient winning. But Dr. Yeshera seemed to be suggesting something else entirely. You believe there was another motivation? I believe humans are more complex than most species realize. Their emotional responses often appear contradictory until you understand the underlying principles that guide their behavior. Through the transparisteel, Zextai watched James adjust his position in the chair without ever releasing his daughter's hand. The man had been sitting vigil for 6 hours, barely moving except to accommodate the medical staff. His dedication was absolute. He fights for his offspring, Zextai said. This is comprehensible. Yes, but consider the implications. Most species would seek the quickest possible victory to claim the prize money and fund the treatments. James deliberately extended the fight to ensure it was conducted with proper honor. He risked losing everything for the sake of principle. Zextai pondered this. In Kytherian culture, honor was important, but survival always took precedence. A warrior who had the chance to save his offspring's life, but chose to risk defeat for abstract reasons would be considered mentally unstable. Perhaps humans simply value honor above survival, he suggested. Dr. Yeshera's crest feathers shifted to a pattern Zextai recognized as mild amusement. I've treated thousands of human patients over the years. They value survival quite highly when it matters. But they seem to have a different understanding of what survival actually means. I do not follow your meaning. Watch him, Dr. Yeshera said, gesturing toward James. See how he maintains contact with his offspring even while she sleeps? That's not just affection. It's a biological imperative. Humans form emotional bonds that are nearly impossible to break. Threatening those bonds triggers responses that other species find incomprehensible. As if sensing their observation, James looked up from his daughter and noticed Zextai standing outside the room. Their eyes met through the transparisteel, and the human's expression shifted to something Zextai had learned to recognize as surprise. James carefully released Sarah's hand, whispered something to the sleeping child, and made his way to the corridor where Zextai waited with Dr. Yeshera. Zextai, James said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. I didn't expect to see you here. Is everything all right? The casual concern in his voice was jarring. This was a being Zextai had fought with lethal intent, who had every reason to view him as an enemy. Yet James spoke as if they were old companions meeting by chance. I wish to observe the offspring for whom you fight, Zextai replied honestly. She is the reason you defeated me. I thought perhaps understanding her would help me understand my failure. James's expression softened. She's not a failure to understand, Zextai. She's just a sick little girl who needs help. Would you like to meet her? She's awake now. The offer was completely unexpected. In Kytherian culture, offspring were protected from all outsiders until they reached maturity. The idea of introducing a child to a former combat opponent would be unthinkable. I would be honored, Zextai managed, if it is truly acceptable. Sarah loves meeting aliens. She's been studying your species since she found out we fought. Fair warning, she has a lot of questions. They entered the medical room together, James leading the way to the bed where his daughter was now sitting up, looking pale, but alert. She was even smaller than Zextai had expected, her limbs thin and delicate. But her eyes held the same fierce intelligence he had seen in her father's gaze. "Sarah, sweetheart, this is Zextai. He's the Kytherian warrior I told you about." The child's face brightened with genuine excitement. "Really? You're huge. Dad said you were big, but I didn't imagine this big. Are all Kytherians your size? Do you really have 4 hearts? Can I see your talents?" The rapid-fire questions left Zextai momentarily speechless. He had expected fear, perhaps curiosity, but not this enthusiastic acceptance. Yes, I am typical size for my species. I have 3 hearts, not 4. And my talons are retracted currently for safety." He carefully extended one claw a few inches, demonstrating the mechanism. "They are quite sharp." Sarah studied the display with scientific intensity. "Fascinating. The bone structure must be remarkably flexible to allow for such extension and retraction. Is it similar to Earth feline anatomy?" James laughed. "I told you she was smart. She's been reading xenobiology texts since she was 5. Your offspring possesses remarkable intelligence," Zextai said. "She will indeed become a formidable xenobiologist." "That's the plan," Sarah agreed. "Assuming I survive long enough to finish my education. These treatments are necessary, but not guaranteed effective." The casual way she discussed her own potential mortality shocked Zextai. This was a child who faced death with the same calm acceptance he had seen in veteran warriors. "You are not afraid?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But fear doesn't help anything. Dad taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid." Zextai looked at James with new understanding. The human had not just been teaching his daughter xenobiology. He had been preparing her to face an uncertain future with strength and dignity. "Your father is a wise teacher. He's also a really good fighter," Sarah said proudly. "I watched your match on the public feeds. You were incredible, but Dad was just a little bit better. That's okay, though. Someone has to win, right?" The child's matter-of-fact acceptance of his defeat was somehow more comforting than all the consolations he had received from fellow Kytherians. To her, it was simply a fact of competition, not a source of shame. "Did your father explain why I lost?" Zextai asked. Sarah nodded seriously. "You're a warrior who learned to fight for honor and glory. Dad fights for love. Love makes you stronger than honor alone." The simple statement hit Zextai like a revelation. All his analysis of human physiology and psychology, all his research into Deathworld adaptations and predator behavior, had missed the central truth that a 7-year-old child could articulate clearly. James had not won through superior technique or greater strength, though he possessed both. He had won because he was fighting for something that transcended personal achievement. His motivation was not conquest or glory, but protection of someone he loved. "I begin to understand," Zextai said quietly. Dr. Yeshera chose that moment to return with test results. "I'm afraid I need to interrupt. Sarah, your latest scans look quite promising. The treatment appears to be working better than expected." Relief flooded James's face. "How much better?" "Well enough that we can extend the interval between treatments from 3 months to 6. Possibly longer if this trend continues." Zextai watched the interplay of emotions across the humans' faces. Joy, relief, hope, and, beneath it all, the ever-present love that bound them together. It was the same force that had driven James to victory in the arena, now sustaining them both through medical uncertainty. "This is excellent news," Zextai said. "Your offspring continues to prove her strength." "She gets that from both sides of the family," James replied. "Stubbornness is a dominant human trait." They talked for another hour, covering topics ranging from Kytherian culture to human exploration of hostile environments. Sarah peppered Zextai with technical questions about his species biology and homeworld conditions. James shared stories of construction projects on various worlds, each one highlighting humanity's casual approach to working in conditions that would terrify most aliens. As the conversation continued, Zextai found his respect for these beings growing beyond anything he had previously imagined. They faced challenges that would break other species, yet they did so with humor, determination, and an unshakable commitment to protecting those they loved. When it came time to leave, Sarah insisted on saying goodbye properly. "Will I see you again, Zextai?" she asked. I'd love to learn more about Kytherian culture. If your father permits it, I would be honored to share what knowledge I possess. James nodded. You're welcome anytime. Sarah doesn't get many opportunities to interview actual aliens about their cultures. As they prepared to part ways, James pulled Zextai aside for a private word. Thank you for coming here, the human said quietly. I know this couldn't have been easy after our fight. It means a lot that you wanted to understand rather than just accept defeat. Your victory taught me that I understood little about true strength, Zextai replied. Your offspring has completed that education. You fight not just with physical power, but with purpose that transforms everything else into something greater. James smiled. Sarah has that effect on people. She's going to change the galaxy someday, assuming we can keep her healthy long enough. I believe she will succeed in both goals. They clasped hands in the human farewell gesture, and Zextai felt something he had never experienced before, genuine friendship with a former opponent. As he made his way back through Centauri Station, Zextai's mind was already working through the implications of everything he had learned. The galactic community vastly underestimated humanity, viewing them as simple brutes from a savage world. But the truth was far more complex and potentially troubling. Humans were not just physically formidable. They possessed emotional drives that could sustain them through challenges that would break other species. Their capacity for love, particularly for their offspring, created motivations that transcended normal survival instincts. In combat, this made them unpredictable and extremely dangerous. A human fighting for loved ones would not yield when rational beings would surrender. They would continue long past the point where victory seemed impossible, drawing strength from sources that other species could barely comprehend. But, beyond their military potential, humans represented something else entirely, a new model for what sapient life could become. Other species sought to overcome challenges through technology, diplomacy, or careful avoidance. Humans embraced challenges directly, adapting themselves rather than their environment, growing stronger through adversity. What would happen when such beings spread throughout the galaxy? What would they accomplish? What would they protect? And, perhaps most importantly, what would they fight for next? Zextai boarded his transport ship with these questions swirling through his mind. The journey back to Kythera would give him time to process everything he had experienced. But, already, he was forming plans that would have seemed impossible before his encounter with James Sullivan and his remarkable daughter. He had been defeated in honorable combat, but, in that defeat, he had discovered something far more valuable than an unbroken winning streak. He had learned that there were forms of strength beyond anything his people had ever imagined. The galaxy was about to discover the same lesson, whether it was ready or not. As his ship departed Centauri Station, Zextai took one last look at the medical facility where a small human girl continued her fight against impossible odds, supported by a father who had redefined what it meant to be a warrior. They would succeed. He had no doubt of that now. And, when they did, the repercussions would reshape everything anyone thought they knew about the species from the Deathworld called Earth. The universe was about to become a very different place. 2 years had passed since Sarah Sullivan's successful treatment, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what Zextai had learned in that medical facility on Centauri Station. The child who had dreamed of becoming a xenobiologist was now 9 years old, healthy, and already making contributions to interspecies research that left seasoned scientists speechless. But it was not Sarah's achievements that had captured galactic attention. It was the revelation of what her father represented, and what that meant for humanity as a whole. Zextai stood before the assembled Council of Worlds, the governing body that maintained peace among 47 star systems. Representatives from dozens of species filled the circular chamber, their various forms of anxiety creating a palpable tension in the recycled air. He had been invited to speak as an expert witness, though the subject of his expertise was something none of them truly wanted to hear. Honored Council, Zextai began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 2 years ago, I was defeated in honorable combat by a human named James Sullivan. Today, I stand before you to warn that this defeat was not an isolated incident, but a glimpse of something that will reshape our understanding of galactic civilization. Council leader Vexthran, a crystalline being whose species had maintained galactic peace for over 2 centuries, leaned forward on his platform. Warrior Zextai, your reputation for honesty is well known. However, your claims about human capabilities seem exaggerated. One fighter defeating another, even unexpectedly, hardly constitutes a galactic threat. With respect, Council Leader, my defeat was not the revelation. The revelation was what I learned afterward about human nature and capabilities. Zextai gestured to the holographic display that materialized beside him. These are the results of systematic analysis conducted over the past 2 years, examining human performance across multiple sectors. The display showed a complex array of data points, charts, and statistical analyses. But the conclusions were stark and undeniable. In every field where humans have been employed, construction, mining, exploration, security, research, they consistently outperform projections by margins that initially appeared to be measurement errors. When we corrected for what we assumed were calculation mistakes, the pattern only became more pronounced. Ambassador Kretak from the hegemony spoke up, his mandibles clicking skeptically. Performance variations between species are common. Some excel in certain environments while struggling in others. What makes humans noteworthy? Zextai highlighted specific sections of the data. Humans excel in all environments. Vacuum work that would require extensive life support for other species. Humans volunteer for extended assignments. High radiation zones that trigger mandatory rotation policies for other workers. Humans request overtime shifts. Gravity wells that crush most aliens. Humans build their cities there. A ripple of concerned discussion spread through the chamber. Council Leader Vex Thran called for silence. You're suggesting that humans are simply more adaptable than other species. I'm suggesting that humans don't just adapt. They thrive in conditions specifically designed to eliminate biological life. But that's not the concerning part. Zextai paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The concerning part is that they appear to be getting stronger. This declaration triggered immediate outcry from multiple council members. Shouts of impossible and evolution doesn't work that way filled the chamber. Order. Vex Thran's crystalline structure flared with authority. Explain this claim, Warrior Zextai. Human performance metrics have been improving at a rate of approximately 3% per standard year since we began tracking them. Initially, we attributed this to better training or equipment. But the improvements are biological. Strength, reaction time, endurance, cognitive function, all measurably superior to their own baseline from 5 years ago. Ambassador Tellarian from the Scientific Consortium leaned forward, her sensor arrays focusing intently on the data. Are you suggesting accelerated evolution? I'm suggesting something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans appear to be a species that grows stronger under pressure rather than weaker. Every challenge we present them with results in improved performance rather than breakdown. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Most species reached evolutionary peaks and maintained them through careful environmental management. The idea of a species that continued to improve in real-time challenged fundamental assumptions about biological development. Where is your evidence for these claims? Demanded General Vorthak from the Military Advisory Council. The evidence is everywhere, but the most dramatic example occurred 6 months ago during the Kepler mining incident. Zextai activated a new holographic display, showing the Kepler asteroid field. As you recall, a cascade failure in the automated mining systems left 47 workers trapped in a collapsing excavation site. Rescue operations estimated a 70% casualty rate due to environmental hazards. Images flashed across the display. Twisted metal, unstable rock formations, and the harsh radiation signature that had made rescue so dangerous. The rescue team consisted of 12 humans led by someone many of you might recognize, James Sullivan, who had transitioned from arena combat to emergency response work. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The Kepler rescue had made galactic news, but the details had been classified to prevent panic. The human team entered an environment that our computer models predicted would kill them within 30 minutes. They remained inside for 14 hours. They not only rescued all 47 trapped workers, but actually expanded the rescue operation to include 17 workers who hadn't even been reported missing yet. Ambassador Kretak's mandibles clicked frantically. Surely they used advanced protective equipment? Standard environmental suits. the same equipment that failed to protect the original workers. The humans succeeded through what can only be described as voluntary adaptation to hostile conditions. Zextai highlighted medical data from post-rescue examinations. Their biological systems actually adjusted to function more efficiently in high radiation, low oxygen environments while under extreme physical stress. That's impossible, breathed Dr. Yashena from the Medical Council. Biological systems don't work that way. Human biological systems apparently do. But even this remarkable feat pales in comparison to what we discovered about their motivation. Zextai changed the display to show personnel files. James Sullivan accepted this assignment not for the standard hazard pay or recognition. He volunteered because one of the trapped workers was a Centaurian engineer whose daughter attended the same medical facility as Sullivan's child. The chamber erupted in confused discussion. Council leader Vexthran struggled to maintain order. You're saying a human risked death to save strangers? I'm saying a human redefined the concept of stranger. During our investigation, we discovered that Sullivan had never met this Centaurian engineer. They had no previous contact, no shared experiences, no obligations to each other. Sullivan volunteered solely because their children had played together in a hospital waiting room. The implications were staggering. Most species maintained clear distinctions between family, tribe, and outsiders. Protection instincts typically extended only to genetic relatives or those with established social bonds. This behavior would be considered pathological in most species, observed Dr. Yashena. Risking one's life for genetic strangers serves no evolutionary purpose. Unless, Zextai said quietly, you're dealing with a species that has redefined survival to include the welfare of others beyond traditional kinship groups. Ambassador Tellarian's sensors were working frantically, processing the implications. Are you suggesting humans have evolved beyond traditional survival instincts? I'm suggesting that humans never developed traditional survival instincts. They appear to be a species that survived by expanding their definition of US to include anyone they perceive as worthy of protection. General Vorthak leaned forward aggressively. This makes them unpredictable in military scenarios. How do we plan defenses against a species that might sacrifice themselves for total strangers? You don't, Zextai replied bluntly. And that brings me to the real reason I requested this audience. He activated a final set of displays showing population and expansion data for human settlements throughout the galaxy. Human population growth has accelerated beyond all projections. They're not just surviving in hostile environments, they're seeking them out. Every Deathworld, every hostile system, every location we've declared uninhabitable has become a target for human colonization. The data showed an exponential curve that defied conventional migration patterns. More concerning is their technological development rate. Humans learn from every species they encounter, but they don't just adopt existing solutions. They improve them, sometimes dramatically. Examples flashed across the display. Human modifications to Kytherian armor that increased effectiveness by 40%, improvements to Centaurian medical technology that had revolutionized trauma treatment, innovations in asteroid mining that had tripled extraction efficiency. They're not just adapting to our technology. They're making it better than we ever imagined possible. Council leader Vexthran's crystalline structure dimmed with concern. What exactly are you recommending, Warrior Zextai? I'm recommending that we fundamentally change how we interact with humanity before they make the decision for us. The chamber fell silent. Explain. Currently, we treat humans as useful laborers for dangerous work. We employ them in hazardous occupations, dangerous exploration missions, and high-risk construction projects. We pay them well and consider ourselves generous for providing opportunities other species can't handle. Zextai paused, scanning the assembled representatives. But we're not employing a labor force. We're training an army. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every representative understood the implications immediately. Every human who survives a dangerous assignment becomes stronger, smarter, and more capable. Every challenge we give them to solve makes them better at solving challenges. Every hostile environment they adapt to expands their range of operational capability. General Vorthak's voice carried barely controlled panic. Are you suggesting humans represent a military threat? I'm suggesting humans represent an evolutionary threat to our understanding of what's possible. Zextai gestured to the data displays. In 50 years, maybe less, they'll be capable of thriving in conditions that would kill our best-protected military units. They'll have technology we can't match and motivations we can't predict. Ambassador Kretak clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. What do you believe their intentions are? That's the terrifying part. I don't think they have intentions in the way we understand them. They just expand. They see a problem, they solve it. They encounter suffering, they try to stop it. They find hostile environments, they make them livable. Zextai thought of Sarah Sullivan, now 9 years old, and already corresponding with researchers across the galaxy about xenobiological adaptations. They don't think in terms of conquest or territory or resource control. They think in terms of helping and protecting and improving whatever they encounter, which would be comforting, except they're becoming powerful enough to help whether we want their assistance or not. The chamber buzzed with anxious discussion as representatives began calculating the implications for their own worlds and species. What do you recommend? Council Leader Vexthran asked. Partnership. Full partnership. Not as employers hiring dangerous labor, but as equals working toward common goals. Because the alternative is waiting to see what decisions they make about our future without consulting us. Ambassador Tellarian's sensors focused intently on Zextai. You believe they would make such decisions unilaterally? I believe they already are. Have you reviewed human expansion patterns? They're not asking permission to colonize systems anymore. They're simply moving into areas we've declared uninhabitable and making them work. They're solving problems we've accepted as permanent features of galactic life. New data appeared on the displays showing recent human settlements in previously impossible locations. The Maelstrom Nebula, where radiation levels kill most organic life within hours. Humans built a research station there last month. The Shattered Worlds, where gravitational anomalies tear apart conventional structures. Humans are mining rare elements. They're using techniques they developed specifically for the environment. Each example drove home the same point. Humans weren't waiting for permission or invitation. They were simply doing what they believed needed to be done. Within a generation, maybe two, humans will be capable of surviving and thriving in any environment the galaxy has to offer. They'll have solutions to problems we've never solved and technologies we've never imagined. The question isn't whether they'll reshape galactic civilization. Zextai looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of representatives from species that had maintained galactic stability for centuries. The question is whether we want to be part of that process or whether we want to be protected by it against our will. The silence stretched for long minutes as the assembled council members processed the implications. Finally, Council Leader Vexthran spoke. What would this partnership look like? It would start with treating humans as equals rather than useful labor. It would continue with shared research and development rather than simply hiring them for jobs we consider too dangerous. And it would require accepting that some of our fundamental assumptions about biological limitations and species capabilities were wrong. Ambassador Kretak leaned forward. And if we choose not to pursue this partnership, Zextai thought of James Sullivan and his daughter, of the casual way they approached impossible challenges, of their absolute commitment to protecting others regardless of species or origin. Then, we hope they continue to consider our welfare when they make decisions that affect the entire galaxy, because they will make those decisions. The only question is whether we want a voice in them. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Zextai had expected. 24 worlds in favor of formal partnership protocols with humanity, 22 opposed, and 1 abstention. But it was enough. 3 months later, Zextai found himself back on Earth, standing in the same arena where he had first encountered human exceptionalism. But this time, he wasn't there to fight. He was there to witness the signing of the Terran Partnership Accords, the first treaty recognizing humanity as equal partners in galactic civilization rather than useful laborers from a dangerous world. James Sullivan stood beside him in the viewing area, wearing formal clothes that looked uncomfortable on his frame built for action. Sarah, now healthy and growing at the rapid rate typical of human children, fidgeted beside her father while taking notes on the various alien dignitaries present. Did you ever imagine it would come to this? James asked quietly. When you defeated me in this arena, I thought I was learning about human combat capabilities, Zextai replied. I had no idea I was witnessing the beginning of a galactic transformation. Sarah looked up from her notes. Dad says you're the reason we're being treated as equals now instead of just useful barbarians from a death world. Your father's victory was the catalyst, but your species' nature made this outcome inevitable. James smiled. Sarah's already planning her next research project. She wants to study how different species adapt to cooperation rather than just competition. A worthy subject, though I suspect she'll discover that humans are uniquely suited for this kind of adaptation as well. On the arena floor below, human and alien representatives signed documents that would reshape the balance of galactic power. It was a peaceful revolution, accomplished through demonstrated capability rather than force, but a revolution nonetheless. What happens next? James asked. Zextai watched the ceremony, thinking of all the impossible things humans had already accomplished and all the challenges they would undoubtedly seek out in the future. Now we find out what the galaxy becomes when guided by a species that considers protection of others more important than protection of self. Sarah grinned. Sounds like it's going to be interesting. Indeed, Zextai agreed. I believe interesting is an understatement. As the ceremony concluded and the new era of human galactic partnership officially began, Zextai reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had started with his defeat in combat, continued with a lesson about the power of love and protection, and culminated in the recognition that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history. They were a species that grew stronger under pressure, more determined when facing obstacles, and more committed to others' welfare as they encountered new forms of suffering. They had turned their death world origin into an advantage, their biological limitations into strengths, and their emotional bonds into a source of power that other species could barely comprehend. The galaxy was indeed about to become very interesting. And, for the first time since his defeat in this arena, Zextai found himself looking forward to discovering what impossible challenges these remarkable beings would tackle next. Whatever came next, he was certain of one thing. The universe had never seen anything like humanity, and it never would again. They were unique, extraordinary, and absolutely unstoppable when they set their minds to protecting something they cared about, which, as it turned out, included everyone.